quick bit of background for you, if I can. Lisa and I were very fortunate to take a team across to an international ADHD conference in Dallas in Texas. And we met many people, some of whom we've been working with for years and some who are new to our friendship group, if you will. And Polina was at a session we were at with international visitors, and we could feel a spark where we all felt, I think, didn't we, that we were on the same page and looking for the same thing. Now, Polina's got an occupation as an OT, which is particularly different to what we've worked with and pulled a webinar together before. And we were particularly excited when we put the idea of having a joint webinar across the pond together, that Polina very kindly said, that sounds exciting, I'll have a look at that, let's do it. And here we are. So Polina, what I'd like to do is, Polina, introduce yourself if you can, and then Lisa.
Sure.
And then I'll throw the first pebble in the pond, and we'll start off with some chat, if that's okay. So Polina, tell us a little bit about yourself and your discipline.
So I'm a speech language pathologist by training. So I specialize in different areas of language development, and I have expertise mainly with children with ADHD and autism. So I have a private practice here in New York, and we are very much neurodiversity affirming. And a lot of the clients who I see really struggle with executive function skills, like we've discussed, and areas of emotions, behaviors, and also a lot of mealtime challenges.
Excellent. So you're using that expression, a pathologist, which is an unusual expression in our use of language. So you know that'll be something we'll discuss in a minute. Pathology over here is more or less dealing with people who are dead, and so let's just dismiss that myth straight away. Lisa, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name's Lisa Mangle, and I'm the clinical director here at ADHD 360. So I help to manage a growing group of clinicians. I think there's 45 clinicians at the moment, and we're currently assessing about, well, over 1,000 children, young people and adults a month. So it's a big team and changing a lot of lives. So I've worked in ADHD in a variety of guises for about 20 years, and along with Phil, very passionate about getting this right and, you know, reaching as many people as we can in a safe but effective way. And we're continuing to grow and develop, so it's exciting times.
Excellent, thanks, Lisa. Polina, let me come to you first, if I can, as we would call it, SALT here, speech and language therapist. And we've, as an organisation, we've employed our first speech and language therapist. She starts with us very soon. And steering that in our setup more towards the autism side of things, because people, you know, autistic people particularly steer that way. But if we stick with the ADHD group for a second, when we were talking in November, you know, what got me excited were the ideas you had for how speech and language can really assist somebody with ADHD. And I guess the whole point of the webinar is to sort of give people some top tips, some ideas. It's a broad overview. If I said to you, so okay, what's speech and language going to do for someone with ADHD? What would your answer be? Because that's a great way to start, I think.
Well, it's a really great question, because you have to fully understand.
Okay, first difficult question, and we've frozen Polina. Okay, Polina, we seem to have lost contact with you, which makes me sound a bit like Houston and Apollo 13. Whilst we get Polina back, Lisa, let's switch to you in terms of, you know, we've started working with our own speech and language therapist. What are you looking for as clinical director in terms of speech and language for our ADHD community, do you think?
Well, do you know what? It's a really, really interesting question. And I honestly think that from a speech and language perspective, we don't consider it enough in the UK. I was fascinated listening to Polina talking when we were in the US. So, you know, as you've said, it's something that we always consider with someone who's potentially on the autistic spectrum, but we very rarely consider it in terms of someone with ADHD. And we all know that ADHD and autism is a spectrum. So, you know, you've got ADHD here, autism here, and patients are often somewhere in between. So for me, it's why not consider speech and language, you know, and I think it is something that, you know, we're going to learn from Polina. And, you know, they're often ahead of us over in the US in a lot of ways. But, you know, I'm quite excited to hear what Polina has to say.
Oh, good. I'm back.
You're back. When we lost you there, we realised that your internet had cut out. I posed a question to Lisa about what are you looking forward to having speech and language as part of our ADHD offer. And we were talking about the fact that we normally steer speech and language towards the autism side traditionally in the UK, and bringing it into the ADHD side as part of the therapeutical package is quite exciting. So that gives me the chance to ask you that question again, if you will. And there I go. The first time I ask you a big question and your internet falls apart. So let's tread gently into that question again. But what in your world does speech and language bring into an ADHD treatment pathway?
Well, so it's a really great question because I bring the play background and really understanding how the dynamics of play are intertwined with executive functioning capacities and how you grow all of those executive function skills through play. And then here comes the use of language and really understanding how the way that we use words really lands on kids and lands on their parents, because just a small shift in the words that we use has such a huge effect.
That's really interesting because in other work, I teach to use open questions rather than closing conversations down and who, what, how, when, were, and all those kind of ways to actually open up a conversation with people. And one of the things that I often work with people is try not to use the why question too much, because it becomes something that becomes pejorative almost. Why did you do that? As opposed to, okay, so what we were hoping for when we did that is a completely different set of language to why. You know, so where do you see language? And clearly it has a massive importance on people who are struggling to regulate emotion, people who got rejection sensitivity and those kind of things.
Yep.
That language really kicks in quite powerfully at that point, doesn't it?
It does. And I love what you said about the why, because when I talk about a why question, it sounds very accusatory. And I personally flip it to a how. So if something isn't working out, my go-to is, how did that work for you? Or like, I wonder what else we're looking at, rather than it's exactly what you said, Phil. Why did you do that?
And maybe for parents listening here, or indeed adults listening on their own behalf or on behalf of partners and things, if we wrote who, what, how, when, where, why on a board, I would always write why in red to kind of signal a danger symbol for the use of the word why. And I think what we're saying here, and at least I'm going to bring you in a second, is that the work that we do, with people in terms of emotional regulation, dysregulation, and being close to that thing we call the lose it line, and for adults who suffer greatly from rejection and are very sensitive and have that rejection dysphoria, our use of language as their partner in a conversation, whatever the dynamic is there, is hugely important as to the success of that outcome. And maybe one of the drivers we need is to always be looking to have a productive conversation, not just a conversation that can fall apart. And and you're quite rightly saying that. I'm going to ask you about play in a second, Polina, but just bring Lisa in for a second. When we're managing, and we've had many webinars about rejection sensitivity dysphoria and things. What you use language quite a lot clinically. So where do you go with that when you've got a patient who's got that sensitivity to rejection? Where do you take things there?
I mean, you mentioned the lose it line for one. So I think that's actually quite important to talk about. And so I've just done a quick diagram. So I describe this as someone's lose it line. And people with ADHD who are untreated, so certainly those patients that I see at the beginning, children and adults, are very, very close to this lose it line, but they appear just the same as you and I. So you can't see bubbling underneath all that frustration and rejection and negative language that's used towards them multiple times a day. And then one little thing happens for that individual and they have a little blip, and it's small, but it takes them over this lose it line. So they appear to go from 0 to 100 like that, when actually we're very close to 100 to begin with, because of the negative words that are used on a almost hourly, minutely basis to some of our patients. So treating that ADHD brings them down to somewhere down here. You have a little blip and you're nowhere near this lose it line. Yes, you can still lose it, but it'd have to be something really big. And it's really interesting because I observed an assessment of one of our clinicians the other day, and there was so much negativity going on from a language perspective from both parents, but predominantly dad. So, one of the things the clinician talked about was how you can use language in a way that's positive or not negative, however you want to phrase that. And I think it's really important, specifically for parents of young people. And, they need 10 lots of positive praise for every negative, for their self-esteem to remain wherever it is today, and it could be on the floor. So that means they need tons. And the clinician was really good at giving that positive praise, and there were just loads of it. And she was trying really hard to educate the parents as she was going along with the assessment. It's really good to watch, actually.
Absolutely, and I guess that kind of the whole conversation at that point is about the dynamic of someone talking with somebody with autism. If we flip that into your play therapy, Polina, and play as a communication coming the other way, and watching a child start to communicate through play and relaxing their own boundaries, so there'll be more of a free child kind of spirit and what have you. What do you see with play therapy? Because I'm excited about what that gives from our previous conversations.
So for me, I see that play has no bounds, right? And anything exists in the world of play. I don't label it as like, oh, that's aggressive, or like that's not something that we should be playing around with. It's very much exploratory, and it's so individualized to each child's interests and ideas. And what I'm looking for is what ideas the child brings to the play. And also the hardest part for when we're talking about adults is for parents of kids with ADHD to really say, I don't know how to play. And it's like, I could watch you and I understand the scenario. And then when it's up to me, I'm stuck, because I'm almost in that fix it mode of, oh, the play didn't go right, but there's no right or wrong. It went the way it went. And it's the problem solving piece that I teach. And it's not just for the kids, it's for the parents also, to be able to come into a play seed and really like embody that character or the role that the child sets for them. And the greatest thing about working with kids with ADHD is that you see them start to really learn how to regulate their emotions through these play dynamics. And for me, when it comes to the language, I do a lot of noticing, and then I hear the parents start to use the same language, and then the kids start to pick up on the same language also. And that's the best part, where if we have a conflict in play, which is the greatest place that conflict can happen, and I start saying that, oh, I didn't realize that this is the idea you had. I was thinking of something different. And the child automatically just de-escalates and goes, oh yeah, my idea is different than yours, right? Versus it being, you know, from previous experiences, just having things thrown in the air or at you as their way of saying something didn't work out and I don't really know what else to do. People around me aren't really helping me. So this is that line. I just went way past it, and here's my response. So instead of, and when kids usually come to me or parents call in a crisis, it's because they've been told that their child is aggressive or oppositional. And with the wording, I always like to flip that, especially when I hear the word oppositional. So I say like, oh, you mean they have a lot of their own ideas and intentions? Like, oh, like they really want to lead. This is the way that they're showing up. And it's exactly what you said, Lisa. The way that parents consider their kids and the language that they use around them and the way they talk about them, that's the way the kids are they're going to continue showing up exactly in that way, because that's the expectations you've set, versus changing your mindset and then changing, like really reframing your whole thought process. And as you know, it doesn't happen in one session, doesn't happen in a month. It could take a while, it could take a few months, it can take a year. And the greatest part is, though, when that switch happens, you see a completely different family dynamic.
Yeah. There's a couple of chats in the chat listing there about exactly that thing. You know, when your child returns home from a tough day at school where negative comments, that why question and all of that, and the child's overwhelmed is a word that's perhaps overused these days, but there is an emotional overwhelm of being put down, about being made to feel anxious, and what coping mechanisms do mum and dad and carers need to actually de-escalate that. And I'd be very interested, Polina, in where you take that. I know, Lisa, we have a clinical view, don't we, of how we can manage in the home, and I'll come to you on that, in terms of when the kid comes home from school and is literally emotionally overwhelmed with negativity. What language can a parent use, which, as you say, starts to become the learned behavior going forward over time, where the child, as the child grows, starts to actually grow their own appropriate use of language, or indeed, if that doesn't happen well, their own inappropriate use of language. Is there a top kind of tip for a parent in that scenario from the SLT perspective?
For me, from my personal and clinical perspective, it's describing the situation rather than putting your own emotions onto the child. So when a child comes home and they're just in disarray, for me, it's more about, oh, it looks like you've had a rough day. Like something at school must have been so tough. And that just leaves it opens up the conversation, versus like telling a child like, oh, it looks like you're frustrated. Well, how do we know that? Or it looks like you're upset. We don't know that. We just know that something was really hard and something was really challenging. And I think we talked about this idea of resources, right? We all have a certain amount of resources that we wake up with, whether we've had a good night's sleep, depending on what we ate during the day. And then those resources get used up. And for kids with ADHD, and also for adults with ADHD, the more effort that something takes, the more it takes away from those resources. And especially if you're a child and holding yourself together as much as you can during the school day with all of this other feedback, whether unfortunately it's negative, you come home and it's just, you're done. And it's the release of, this is my safe space and I don't have to pretend that I'm okay anymore. And the other biggest piece that's challenging for parents and that I help them with is, instead of saying it's okay, you're okay, letting them know that, wow, it looks like this does not feel good. Because the phrase of it's okay, it's going to be okay, I tell parents, I was like, I feel like that's more for you. Like,
Yes.
you're using that to regulate yourself. You say it in your head because clearly this situation is not okay. So instead of trying to like fix it really fast, sit with that discomfort for a little bit and show your child, or even, you know, your significant other, we're talking about adults with ADHD, show them that you can understand that discomfort without getting like dysregulated yourself. And that's the biggest challenge, where you can tune into how uncomfortable it must be for them and yet remain regulated at the same time.
It's really interesting. There's a top tip there which you gave, and then we passed on, and I want to go back to it. And that is, and I want to amplify it a little bit. And that is how, as adults who want to try and solve every damn problem in the world for the person that we care for, we can step to judgment far too quickly, and that judgment starts to erode empathy. So I can see that you're frustrated. No, I'm not frustrated. I've just had a really hard day. And if we stop the interpretation and just say, wow, that looks like you've had a hard day, do you want to talk about it? Or do you want to just some time out? Do you want some time on your own? What can I do to facilitate you coming home and having the best hour that you can have? And we talk about, when we're working with clinicians, about, you know, the child that comes home in that state where they've done their absolute damnedest to behave at school, to keep it together. It's not just about naughtiness, but keeping it all together, managing that frustration, managing that anxiety. They get home to their safe space. And when you use the expression "to their safe space," Lisa and I's faces lit up, because that's exactly how we try and deal with it with schools who don't get it. And one of the things in the chat here is about the school that can't see it because the child's not misbehaving. And therefore, there can't be anything neurodevelopmentally wrong with the child because they're not misbehaving. Such an old-fashioned, flat Earth society perspective. And we work and coach with sort of say, look, if your child comes home and you can see that sign, that's going back to your point, that child looks as if they've had a really tough day. Sitting down and saying, now's the time to do your homework, is just about going to be the worst thing you could do for them.
Right.
So what is it that will reduce that? And if we have a jar and the jar's empty of pennies, what is it that's going to put pennies back in the jar? And there's chat about oppositional children and what have you. So we've got to contract that. So we're going to put some pennies in your jar, but then we need to take some pennies out again so your homework still gets done. And that contracting relationship. But the speech and language therapy there is as much around the guardian intervention as it is around coaching. And we coach the child through learned behavior by the interventions, don't we? And seeking to put pennies in the jar without that judgment, I think, is a hugely important part of it. And as you say, the safe space. Let's switch back to play again. Let's just go back to play for a second, because that's really exciting. It brings out the boy in. One of the things we mentioned when we were in America together was Lego, and how absolutely wonderful for this community Lego is. And and everywhere I go and talk with adults with ADHD or autism or parents, Lego always brings it. Yep, I like that. I'm on with Lego. Why does Lego work so well, Polina?
Well, it's Legos, and we also talked about this other really great building tool. They're called Plus. They're all the same shape, and it's when you watch kids like try to figure out how to put something together, you just could see like the wheels turning. And the process of not just figuring out how to put something together, but really being able to like showcase your skill level. You could really see, like, it's so regulating for a lot of the kids. And again, it depends on it really, really depends on the child, because for some of my kids with ADHD, that's too challenging for now. Like looking at a Lego set, and especially if it doesn't have instructions or a manual, it becomes really, really challenging and they become overwhelmed really quickly versus having the play be a little bit more open-ended and freer. So a lot of them also go to, well, I just want to draw, or this, like, I just want to color. And then the other part of the noticing piece and play is, like, we're talking about the way that kids come home from school, when a lot of mine come toward right after school, right? So like I'm that first line of defense almost. And
Yeah.
you know, like I'm thinking of a little girl who I see in particular, and it really depends. It's as if, like, the way that she enters, I know exactly how, if I need to change something that I've previously planned. Because if she enters regulated, I tell her right away, okay, no, we're going to come in, we're going to get settled, and then there's going to be a little challenge I'm going to give you. Let's see how you can handle it, right? Not how well you can do, because then that language is, well, if I don't do well, that means I've failed. Right? It's, I'm going to give you a little bit of a challenge. I want to see how much of it, like, we can handle together. And then based on that challenge, whether it's a new activity or something that we haven't done before and play that requires a lot of effort, she maxes out maybe at 15-20 minutes. So the goal is to catch her right before she maxes out. And then you notice that by her body movements, by the fact that she starts pacing. And then when I notice that piece, my role is to go, oh, it looks like what we're working on got really, really hard, really fast. How about we put it to the side? And right away she'll go, yeah, this, I'm done. I don't know if I could do this anymore. And what's so great about it is that the parent is in the room and she sees the same thing as, like, when she comes home from school and doesn't see me on that day, let's not hit her with the homework. Let's go with, you know, let's have a snack or have some water. Like, let's have that time together to enjoy, and then see if, like, for this first grader, does homework really matter tonight? Like, is that really something that's going to be valuable for her social emotional well-being, like, right now? Because if it's not, like, let it go until the next day, or, you know, do one question instead of giving her a sheet of 10, because if she gets the concept, she gets the concept.
This is brilliant, and you are touching all the buttons that Lisa and I knew this would work. And I'm honestly, when we met you in America, it was fascinating. And I'm just looking at the chat commentary here, and you're pressing all of the buttons that align with our medicine and our therapeutic approach here. So this is fantastic. Now, you touched on something there about, and I want to go back to it again. Then we're looking at the child in play, and or indeed in task, and we're seeing now that no matter what timescale we might expect, we're approaching that point where this is too much and this is an overwhelmed situation. Now, what are you briefly touched on? I want to go back to it. What are those signs that anybody watching this, and it's not just about children, is it? It's about an adult on a task. You talked about walking around and starting to get that fractious nature. What are those signs that you're professionally looking for, that you are then training the parent or the partner to actually look for, to say, now's the time to call it? But what you don't want to be doing is calling a failure. What you want to be doing is saying, hey, now let's just have a break from that, because we can sense something. And it's about, and as you said, I want to go back to the words you used as well. Let's see how we get on with this, as opposed to let's see how quickly you can do this or how well you can complete this task. So we're not putting a failure option in, are we? Taking part of success itself. So talk to us about those trigger points, those trigger symbols, Polina.
So you're right. One of them is that constant walk around. And sometimes the walk around is needed for a lot of my kids with ADHD. And I have kids who also have parents with ADHD who say the same thing, where in order for me to collect my thoughts, I need to pace. And that's the way that, like, I gather the language that I need. For some of them, it's if they start opening up, like, I have things in the office that are sometimes accessible, sometimes aren't. And some of them will start opening up containers really quickly and just dumping everything out. So there goes that impulse control, like, that's gone, right? Because we know that under stress, that weakest executive function skills go first. And if the weaker one is the impulse piece, you could see it automatically. And
Yeah.
for others, they'll start try to like climb furniture or climb like on top of their parent, where now I'm seeing that the body is completely dysregulated. So then we'll slowly move that difficult or challenging activity off to the side and say, well, you know what, let's go move around, because your body is already telling me that this is what it needs right now.
Mhm.
This is, and what I also let them know, how great it is that you're already letting me know what you can and can't handle, and now I'm seeing it too.
Yeah.
So let's, and I have like movement based activities that are planned. The other piece that's so interesting is that, like, I'm thinking of one of the girls who I see who'll say, well, you know, this is what I really wanted to play with, and how, and because she's not really tuned into how dysregulated she is. So I let her know that, like, yes, that idea is really great, right? We go back to the idea she had. Your idea is really great. Right now, to me, it just looks like we can move on to like building a fort, and then let's see. I wonder if we can go back to it. And what happens in that like fort building that we do, what happens for her is then she says, no, I want to spend the rest of my time here. Like, this is now I feel good. Like I'm still use words like I'm cozy here, or like I really like this space. Can I get a book? I just want to sit here and look through the pages. And that's where, like, myself and the parent, we also need to step back and give her that space. And she's already safe because we set it up that way.
It's amazing, isn't it, how that correlation between what we can see and then how we don't always act to what we can see. And I think that the major skill here in working with somebody where in that relationship is not just knowing it and seeing it, it's actually reacting to it in a more trained, in a more responsive, positive way. Let me change the lens for a second. I'm going to bring you in, Lisa, now. Just going medical for a second, then, and Polina, I'll come back to you on it. A lot of the chat is quite rightly parents identifying with how difficult they find it to regulate their emotions and their behaviors when they've got this role to play. But then, you know, a lot of the chat is then saying, but hang on, I'm actually recognizing that what I'm trying to do with my child or with my partner is something that, because I'm struggling so much to do that, I'm now looking at myself in the same light that they've been looked at, and picking up that therapeutic diagnostic requirement that actually says this is a pedigree issue. This is something that runs in families and runs through genes. And Lisa, what I'm inviting you here is your story of the oxygen mask on an aeroplane, because there's a lot of parents here talking about managing their children, when really what they're trying to acknowledge is, how the hell do I manage myself? Do you want to give us that pedigree and the oxygen mask
definitely.
story?
So we're quite proud of the fact that we look for ADHD when we're doing an assessment. So if I'm assessing a child, I'll be looking for ADHD in the parents, in the siblings, in the grandparents. If I'm assessing an adult, I'm looking for ADHD in their children, their siblings, their parents, because if I sort out one person in a family, then I'm not really helping the whole family. And my patient won't be optimal if I'm not helping the rest of the family. And I had a family a couple of years ago, and I assessed the daughter. And it was very clear when I was doing the assessment that one of the parents had ADHD as well. So we had that conversation, and we actually put the daughter's journey on hold. We did the diagnosis, but then I said, look, you know, I think what we should do is help you as the parent, because you're then going to get it right for your child. And that works really well, I think, to actually, and I use that analogy of, you know, if you're on an aeroplane, you would be told to put your own oxygen on as a parent. It doesn't always come naturally, because as a parent, you want to sort your children out, you want to help your children, you want to make their life the best life they could possibly have. But it's my job to explain that that's only possible if you're on point, you know. So for me, it's really important that we support the parents as well, so that they can then move on and
there's
be
a
the
lot
advocate for their child.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of chat here. And I don't know about the education system in America, Polina, and maybe you can enlighten us. There's a lot of chat here about homework and parents. There's a cracking comment in here. And I think when we run these webinars, some of the validation that comes through the chat is incredible. And there's parents here saying, look, the relationship matters more than the damned homework at the moment. And let's get that relationship right. Let's rebuild that parent-child or that sibling relationship. But let's rebuild that relationship. And then from that foundation, and then with the appropriate treatments and the appropriate guidance, we can then rebuild that back in. Now, of course, what we have here is difficulty with the school accepting the common sense of that approach. And because they can't manage to teach a curriculum within the school day, they bang it out as homework. And there's that expectation that everybody has the wherewithal to have a 9-hour schooling day as opposed to a 7-hour schooling day, and has the momentum and the emotional capability to sit and regulate themselves to do that homework. And of course, everybody doesn't. And
right,
there's parents here, and it's just gone alive now, the chat, with parents saying, you know, homework is a trigger. I'm abandoning it. And what have you. I know, Lisa, you've got a very fixed view.
I mean, I've been a teacher, so I feel really confident in saying that homework is not compulsory in the UK. And if it is damaging to the home life and the family, then that's not okay. And I will have the conversation of, you know, obviously I medically treat patients with ADHD with medication. So we'll have that conversation of, look, if you are someone who's a big believer in homework and you want your child to do well, then let's plan the homework. Let's have homework 2 evenings in the week and maybe 1 afternoon at the weekend. And you say to school, homework will be done here, here and here for 40 minutes or whatever it is that you say. And the other thing as well, and this goes hand in hand with homework, and I spoke about this only this week with a parent and a child at the weekend. You know, my daughter's got ADHD and she's got dyslexia. And she was, at one point, she was in a high school that was a specialist language school. And Emily was level 1 when she went into year 7. And just as she was about to, in Spanish, and just as she was about to pick a GCSE, she was still level 1. And they were insistent on all kids had to do a language. So I went to the head of languages and said, absolutely not. You know, if you want my daughter to fail and do 3 lessons a week where she comes home in tears, and she will still fail a GCSE Spanish, then carry on. But I'm not allowing that to happen. So I don't want her to do Spanish. I want her to go to the library and have 3 hours in school time where she can do her homework. And that was Emily's homework for 3 hours a week. And it meant that when she could come home, she could relax, not be overwhelmed, switch off, you know, speak to her friends, play games, do whatever to actually unwind from the difficult day that she'd had. And it worked really well. You know, she did well in school eventually. But as a parent, they're your responsibility, they're your child, and you have an opinion. So, you know, don't be scared to voice it in school.
And where does that fit from your perspective with that great homework challenge? And it's still alive, the chat with homework, you know. So
I know.
Where is it in America? Where, you know.
And well, unfortunately, there is a really big push to just do homework one way, and the other part is that you look at a sheet and it's boring, and a lot of like boredom is like for a child with ADHD, for an adult with ADHD, forget it. Boredom is kryptonite. It's like, oh, we're bored, we're done. Like this is not going anywhere, and it's not about, let's say, like, all right, let's abandon it altogether. Let's make it a little bit more interactive, and in a way that we can figure out like how this homework piece is really going to fit in, because you're right, Lisa, some of the parents really say, like, I really do want my child to know what it's like, to start homework and to finish it. And a lot of the battles are from one of the parents. I remember she said, well, I want him to be able to like do the questions right, because then we have to erase it, or he has to read it over again. So I said, well, there's a quick fix. You just make a photocopy of the sheet and let him do it his way. And for most of it, she goes, oh, for almost the whole entire, he just finishes it so quickly that he's pretty much accurate. So I don't have to sit there and watch him, and then let him finish it, let him play, let him do whatever he needs to do, and then come back. And I would even inquire to say, I looked at your homework, you worked so hard on it. There's one question that I read in a different way. Like, we can take a look at it again. And then that gives you it, like, it opens the doors to, oh, like, I wonder what question, mom or dad read in a different way than I did. And this removes the fault versus I saw your homework and there's something you got wrong. It's more about, there's one question that I read in a different way, and I wonder, like, if we could take a look at it together. That's more inviting. And then what tends to happen is the kids will look at the homework and go, oh, yeah, I read it one way, you read it a different way. Okay, well, both answers make sense. And the thing is that they're right, because the way that they interpreted the language, for them, the answer makes sense.
Yeah, and again, we inevitably, when we're talking about SLT, we're talking about everybody in that family environment, not just the SLT for the patient, if you will. And let me ask you a question that's totally disconnected. I'm watching that clock whizzing round, and we've got a great question here about screen time and devices in terms of therapy with play. And of course, the modern, in my day, play was Lego and stuff like that, and being outside and rolling around in mud and eating worms and doing all the things that kids don't do anymore. Yeah, that's why I'm only 21, but that's what eating worms has done for me. But there's a parent saying here, my son has a hyper focus on his Xbox. Now, you'll have a view, and I'm very keen to explore your view on both the positives and the downsides of the technology as play. So where do you take that one, Polina?
That's a hard one, because the hyper focus means he's really good at it, right? And rather than, like, so I don't use any tech in my play, but for kids who like really enjoy, like, they really enjoy video games because there's a lot of problem solving in it, I'll have the parents see if they could join in. Just go, okay, so that it's not just the child and the Xbox, or like the child and the iPad. There's less of an interaction to see, like, if the parent can really join in on what that interest is.
That's really interesting. I had friends stay with us last year, and the son is about 15, and he saw my son's Xbox plumbed into the television, and he said, "Oh wow, what games?" And we said we got F1, and I was thinking, well, hang on, have we come all the way down here to play on the Xbox? And Dad said, right, all of you can have half an hour on the Xbox, and I'll play with you. And the two of them played the Xbox together, and you could actually watch that dynamic suddenly become not something that was exclusionary to anybody. It actually became something that was actually a bond between parent and child. And there's a positivity to that, isn't there, as we use that aspect of play. So as opposed to saying, no, you can't do that, I think what you're saying is we can limit it, we can frame it, and we can reference it, but why not get involved as well?
Right.
And yeah, you're going to have those barriers of teenagers saying, oh, Dad, you're rubbish at this, blah, blah, blah. And it's, well, teach me, help me. And you're getting that enablement then, aren't you, through those kind of things. And, there's a positivity to that. And there's somebody here saying, my son and I love to play the Xbox together. And sometimes it is about us not doing what we want to do, but doing what we should be doing. And breaking down those barriers. Let me switch the lens again if I can. Polina, we talked about play and therapy. Let's talk about speech for a second, in particular. That crossover between autism and ADHD, which is a profound crossover, isn't it? And we don't clinically permit the use of comorbid occurring conditions. We have co-occurring conditions, and we take morbidity out. We've had patients, especially those with slightly autistic tendencies, latch onto the morbidity side of things. So we've taken that out. We have co-occurring conditions. And obviously speech for some people with autism is a particular problem, isn't it? That engagement and what have you. So what are we looking for there as top tips? You know, what's the Room 101 guide on speech with somebody who's neurodiverse, without you giving away all of your intellectual property for people?
Well, the one thing to really understand is that there's a very big difference between the word speech and the word language. And I tell people that all the time. So I don't work on the speech part, which is just like, how do you pronounce a word? I don't even take clients on in that realm. The language part that you mentioned is the engagement comes first, and that back and forth reciprocal interaction comes first. So when a parent says, well, when is my kid going to talk, the first question I ask is, how engaged are you in their interaction? Because they are communicating. They might not be communicating with words right now, they're still communicating. So we take a step back and we focus on, what is communication like as a whole for you right now? And then, yes, where do we want it to go? So it's more from that lens where, well, right now they're communicating with gestures, or right now they're communicating by pushing you out of the way, right? Right now they're communicating by like pulling something out of your hand because they want it, and they don't have the language or the emotional regulation to go, hey, do you mind if I play with this? They take it from you because that's what they need right now in this moment, right? So, and the biggest part for autism, and I tell parents all the time, when your child already shows you with their body, they're communicating that this is something that they want, don't backpedal and ask them what they want. You already know.
Yeah,
because then that breaks that circle of communication, and now you've lost the opportunity.
Yeah, well, that's really interesting, because Russ Barkley, who's one of the great exponents of ADHD research and ADHD practice, and who's been over the years a particular good friend of our service and Lisa and I, Russ is very clear that you, and indeed the whole 1, 2, 3 magic concept is built on, you can't expect somebody who A, is younger and tender in years, and B, struggling to communicate per se, and we know that, you can't therefore expect to rationalize everything with them as if they were a 40-year-old adult full of the skills of a rational communicator. It's for us to adjust our lens and not enforce that adjustment on that other person. So there you're saying the child who might then get, well, don't snatch. Well, I'm not snatching, I'm actually just expressing in the only way I know possible at the moment that I like that. Okay, so you want that. And then slowly you build that skill in the individual to not snatch it, but to just look for it or to look at it. And then that, rather than building a punitive, negative model of don't snatch, well, are you going to ask for that properly or you're not going to get it? Well, I'm not going to bother now. And so on and so on. And one of the things we work with our coaching a hell of a lot is that use of language in a negative, pejorative way is destructive to anybody who's trying to overcome their own anxieties, their own communication challenges, and their own emotional regulation. And there's parents here in the chat talking about having that playtime with their child, even if it is on electronic media. I remember the Wii. Do you remember the Wii when that came out? And it had 10-pin bowling and all of those kind of things. And actually, that was really good family fun with my daughter, but we seem to have stopped all of that kind of stuff. And so I guess the bottom line here is, if the child is hyper-focusing and enjoying and getting something out of their Xbox, their PlayStation, other electronic media is available from the high street store. If they are using that and they're getting benefit from it, use that positivity. Don't try and close that down. And if you can, join in and make it part of something that's productive. You know, there's an awful lot of chat here about homework and challenging the teachers and challenging. You know, when we talk about in the UK, we talk about what accommodations need to be made for the neurodiverse students. The automatic simple answer is more time in exams. But actually things like understanding that when we get home we're burnt out, we've got nothing left in the tank, don't overset homework, and don't punish the child with the detention and stop them playing with their friends because they haven't done last night's homework. This isn't a willful thing, this is a burnout, we've done enough, thank you very much, we've got through the day. Part of that is educating the school to be able to actually have the right therapy appreciation.
Well, with that, unfortunately, like, and I saw in the chat a lot about detention. It's not the schools in the US, they're not also that far off, because I've had 5-year-olds suspended for, you know, so to speak, acting out when we go, all right, he was in sensory overload, and that's the reason that, like, he threw something in the classroom. So and then it's for something that happened, let's say on a Thursday, the punishment is on a Monday.
Yeah,
like
yeah. There's
how
no
does that
correlation,
even
is there? Yeah.
come together? And asking, and then we come back to the why, where it's like, well, you know, he should know better. What do you mean? Like, he was reacting in that moment based on like something that was going on internal, and now you've just completely overloaded his entire sensory system, which is linked to emotions, which is also linked to language. And now you expect them to just get it together. So when they come in on Monday thinking that, like, oh, it's a new day, everything is great, well, actually now you have in-school suspension for something that you did before the weekend.
So let's just change the lens as we run towards the end. Kristen's very timely come back on screen now for us as a kind of, you're in the last 5 minutes, guys, unfortunately. But what I want to do quickly is I'm going to come back to that sensory overload and how we deal with that in a moment. And I'm going to ask you both that question to close us out with a positive coping mechanism for the carer, the partner, what have you. What I want to do first, though, is run the poll that we said we'd run, Kristen, because we're across the pond here, and I'm interested if we have got across the pond. Straightforward question: where are you from? The UK, the USA, or other? And let us know in the comments if you're somewhere else. Because what Polina and Lisa and I are very keen to do is to get that bridge across the Atlantic. And we Warrington, UK. Alicia, that's a really sexy journey you've been on to Warrington. Polina, Warrington is in the northwest of England, and having lived in the northwest of England, it's cold and wet. So yeah, let's see how that polls, because I think it'll be really interesting to see if we have reached across, and if we have, brilliant, and if we haven't, what more can we do to reach across? And Polina, I'm going to bring, whilst we're gathering the polling results, I'm going to come back to you with that. When we sensitize and we capture that sensory overload, and we've got that, what do we do?
So we want to, like, first remain regulated ourselves, and then figure out how we can, sometimes like the de-escalation needs to happen without words, or as few words as possible. Because the one thing I tell parents all the time is, if you're getting lost in your thoughts about what to say, don't say anything. Just like your presence, or something simple as, I see you, I got you, I'm going to be right here, instead of leaving the child to deal with their own emotions. That's really helpful, because oftentimes what I hear is, well, when you're calmed down, then come find me. Like, you're completely breaking that relationship, and you're saying that the relationship is contingent based on, like, how positive. Your child is right, based on whether it's positive or negative, but relationships are not contingent based on that. Right. So, and that's what makes like a deeper bond and a deep relationship. So it's an offering. It's like, I can be here for you whenever you need. And some kids will say, I need you to go away, which is great. And that's where I tell parents, like, don't take, it's not personal. Them saying, I need you to go away, just saying that, like, right now, like, you're even too much for me. And you go, okay, great, I heard you, and I'm going to be, let them know where you are. I'm going to be in the kitchen, or I'm going to be in I'm going to be in the dining room. Like the door is open, come find me.
Yeah, and I think what I take from that to play back to everybody, and there's a couple of comments here about the heartache for parents where the child is saying, "Look, I just want to be alone." Well, I don't want to leave you alone. Well, that's for you to deal with. You've got to process that. And the way to assuage your own guilt there, if you will, is to sort of reach out and say, "Look, I'm next door. The door's open. Whatever I'm doing, I want you to come in when you're ready." And I will give you that space and respect that space. And yeah, I think that's a really good top tip. Not to just break that and say, right, I'm leaving you to it, is to have that positive. I can respect that. I can see where we are. Come and find me, and I'll check back in on you in a little while, and we'll see how we go. Fabulous. I'm going to come back to Lisa. I'm going to come back to you in a second to close out with one thought on all of this, and then back to Polina to close, out of respect of you travelling all the way over from America. Kristen, where are we with the poll?
So we've got 97% UK, 1% USA, and 1% other. And I think the 1% other, they said Vietnam.
Vietnam, yeah, wow. So what that says
Amazing.
is, we'll rerun something in the future, Polina, if you will, and we'll try and go harder on attracting the US group. But Lisa, closing comment from yourself to close us out on a wonderfully informative session.
Yeah, I think adding to what Polina said really is, I think finding out what your child needs at times of stress is probably best done when they're not stressed. So when things have calmed down and you've moved on from the situation, actually having that conversation then, when you're feeling like that, what is the best thing that I can do to make it a little bit easier? And not actually doing it at the time when they're really stressed, and letting them have that time when they come home from school, if they're at school, where they can just do their own thing. So not shouting at them because they've dumped the bag and the school shoes and the coat in the hallway when you just tripped over it, just ignoring that and just letting them go to the room, just do their own thing, whatever that is. I think it's really important, because I don't think we can overemphasize how tough the school day can be. Having watched a child just for an hour have 200 negative comments thrown at them really sticks in my mind, and that's from about 18 years ago, and I've never forgotten it. So we can't overemphasize really just how tough the school day can be for our young people.
Absolutely. And Polina, a closing comment from you, if I can.
Sure. For me, I think one of the most important pieces is for parents to figure out how to view the world from their child's perspective versus trying to do it the other way around and saying that, the child needs to have perspective. When we have that perspective, then like that child really feels seen and heard and understood. And it's the same goes if, you're 5 or if you're 25, where rather than like coming in with solutions, like everybody just wants to be heard and connected to.
Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Now I'm just going to close out with some commentary, that picking up some stuff from the chat here, if I can. We are very, very clear at ADHD 360. We don't abuse these webinars as sales pitches by the back door. That's not what we're about. This is about free help, support, advice, guidance on the chosen subject, and we absolutely love it for that. There's some parents asking there that 360 don't do coaching for children yet. Well, we have an emerging coaching offer which we're doing in partnership with ADHD UK, a renowned UK charity, and we pass our coaching to their team of coaches, so they make some money to support the charity out of the coaching, and you'll find those links on our website now. Kristen, is that all coming about now?
Soon to be, yes.
Soon to be.
Should be
there you
soon,
go. I'll put Kristen
yes.
under pressure now. Soon to be will be very soon to be, and there will be coaching for that. The other thing that's been mentioned and asked for is support group, facilitated support groups. Now Sharon Taylor, nay Sharon O'Dell, who I've been working with for 15 years, is our lead on our coaching and support interventions. And she is running sessions weekly for you, free of charge or very little fee. And we're proudly, we've got zero, £1 sign, £2 sign, £3 sign offering for all of our patients to avail themselves of. Like tonight is free and some of Sharon's work is free. And if it's not free, large group work is a tenner or something. Avail yourself, have a look, keep an eye on our social media channels that Kristen runs for us so well, because we are really proud that we offer everybody support in those ways without it being something that we charge for. And we employ Sharon to provide that support for you. And that support is there. Keep an eye on the 360 social media channels, because there is a lot out there. And for those of you who have said, I can't, as a parent, I want to help myself, but I've been told it's a 6-year waiting list to get help, go to your GP, get them to refer them to ADHD 360 under Right to Choose. It is still a waiting list. I'm not going to hide that. We're working on it. We're employing more clinicians for fun. But we perform 1,000 assessments every month at the moment, and that goes up by about 80 every month as we bring on new staff. So we are part of the national solution for ADHD, and have a good look, and don't expect miracles from us, but we're doing our damnedest. Now, to say thank yous as we close out, Lisa, as always, articulate, clinically brilliant. It's great to have you on board with these events. I love doing them with you, you know I do. Kristen, for pulling it together, sheep herding our diaries to get this together has been far from easy with you and Freya working on that. I'm really, truly grateful. Sharon Taylor, to answer the question, who runs the support group. Now, Polina, if we had a chance meeting in America, it was a meeting of minds, wasn't it, straight away?
Yes.
I'm truly grateful for what you've given this audience tonight. You, like us, are not doing this from a generation of business perspective. We're doing this from helping people. My light's just gone out. Thank you very much for your time. It's really much appreciated. We'll have an email debrief, and maybe we'll look forward to doing something again. And
Sounds great.
And when in October we're over, we'll make sure that we hook up physically. And if there's something that the clinical provision can help you with your audience, maybe we can swap the lens over for you as well in the incoming months. So thank you everybody ever so much for joining. Without the 90 odd people that joined us being with us, it would have been a pretty dull event, I promise you. The chat, the validation that we get from doing these through the chat is incredibly rewarding for us as people that work in this arena. So thank you, and we'll sign off. Please.